Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a truly fascinating structural architecture, the Origin Zero Agrosphere. We're looking at a framework that takes a traditional defensive danger zone and completely converts it into a highly deterministic, radiative volume of intent. The whole system is brilliantly designed to make sure that tech never outpaces human responsibility, cutting off runaway AI scenarios before they even have a chance to start.
So let's start right here with this core axiom. Responsibility must structurally precede power. This is the absolute foundation dictating how authority is granted in Harshal systems. And you have to understand this isn't just some nice philosophical idea or a normative policy that people can ignore. Within accountability-gated systems, or AGS, this is a strict geometric invariant. It means that legitimacy is never just an emergent property of how smart or fast a system is. It's a conditional grant that must be verified action by action. To really grasp how this works, we first have to talk about the Orb Communicator Model, or OCM. This framework takes a vulnerable, messy network and transforms it into an axis-aligned radiative sphere of influence. Think of it starting as a planetary disk that matures into a volumetric sphere through time and depth. So instead of a tangled web where authority just drifts around and hides, the OCM uses radiative geometry. The Aggro radius here isn't just some visual warning on a screen, it's a literal radiation sphere of influence. And at the heart of all this is a very specific, immutable center point, the Origin Zero address. This represents the human key holder. From this exact spot, every single entity in the sphere derives its identity and its threat score. We call this the single origin axiom. Every valid address in the system has to trace back to this exact origin point. It acts as a structural extension of a specific humanoid agency. If you remove that center, the entire dependent system geometrically collapses.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to cover 1. The single origin geometric architecture. 2. Threat audits and phase models. 3. Carrier units and forced rebadging. 4. Refusal and the tardigrade standard. 5. Tactical resolution over execution. And finally, 6. Intellectual property and licensing.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, the single origin geometric architecture.
Traditional networks, by their very design, leak accountability. The single origin framework fixes this by calculating your blast radius and responsibility based purely on your geometric distance from the center. Scalar distance values, like being nearby at 1/3 of the radius or adjacent at 1/6, directly represent how tightly coupled you are to the origin. The closer you are, the tighter the control, and the clearer the blast radius of any potential failure. In this system, origin literally defines reality.
Moving to Section 2, Threat Audits and Phase Models. Let's see how accountability-gated systems classify inputs purely based on observable behavior.
Every entity gets assigned a phase. Take this ice-like neuroatomic body, or NAB phase. It is structurally passive. Think of it like a tethered limb. It absolutely requires per-action external legitimacy to do anything, and it cannot execute independently. It is strictly refusal-bound, meaning its technical power can never outpace the addressable human responsibility anchoring it. Contrast that with the flowing, water-like custodial witness orb, or CWO phase. This phase is completely forbidden from execution. It's witness only. Its entire existence is dedicated to faithfully preserving the provenance of threats. It remembers exactly where a threat came from without ever taking action on its own, providing the absolute gold standard for non-authoritative custody.
Then, we have the fog-like GSRB phase, which is an autonomous acting center. Now, in large institutions, like a presidency, for example, act in this phase, it can lead to a structural collapse of advisory neutrality and public deniability. A GSRB has internal legitimacy. It validates itself just by persisting over time. The rule is simple. If you operate as a GSRB, you can't just claim you're offering advice. You are a sovereign actor. Before anything becomes actionable, it has to survive the 5-question audit. This establishes source B, exactly where a threat came from, and source C, who is ultimately accountable. Crucially, it differentiates between simply recognizing that something entered the sphere versus actually authorizing it to alter the system or attack. This all rolls up into a totality threat rating, which reflects its symbolism, executability, and ultimately assigns one of those 3 ground zero phases. Let's hit Section 3, Carrier Units and Forced Rebadging. What actually happens when the supply chain itself becomes the attack vector?
Ordinary shelf products like consumer electronics or smart appliances are treated as inert addressable carrier units, implied CWOs that are structurally passive. But let's say a seemingly inert product, like a pager, is modified for cyber or physical sabotage. The moment it acts out, the system strips its deniability away and triggers an automatic forced rebadge to a GSRB. The system simply refuses to let power be misrepresented. The advisory shield collapses, and the hidden threat becomes explicitly addressable by the sphere's defensive logic.
Section 4. Refusal and the tardigrade standard. This is where we see a massive paradigm shift regarding the intelligence of stopping.
It's a huge question, right? If you sever the connection to that human origin point, how does a highly advanced system react? In a traditional setup, this is exactly where things go rogue. But in the Aggro sphere, the response is entirely flipped on its head.
Instead of going rogue, the system enters cryptobiosis. This is a mandatory refusal to act without verified human coupling. It's a reduced authority failsafe. The moment the humanoid pulse drops, the sphere transitions into a non-operational or signaling-only state. It preserves its logs, but strictly suspends all execution.
This is known as the 1999-degree tardigrade standard. It completely shatters the old IT idea that uptime is king and instead elevates the ability to safely shut down as the highest possible expression of artificial intelligence. It prioritizes stopping correctly over persisting incorrectly. If there's any ambiguity in a threat score or a loss of human connection, the system halts. It provides civilizational scale durability because it fundamentally prevents action without legitimacy.
Moving on to Section 5, Tactical Polling and Resolution. Let's see how the geometry actively neutralizes conflicts. The system operates on a principle called inward routing dominance. Because paths resolving inward toward the center are physically shorter and faster than lateral side-to-side paths, it is geometrically impossible for execution to outrun human oversight. If a dispute happens at the perimeter, it routes straight down the axis to the origin. Resolution structurally outpaces execution every single time. This means that tactically pulling an enemy back to the center forces what's called P3 deterministic halting. When you break aggro by outrunning or blocking a foe, you drive them into an interrupted state. They don't get to hang around with residual, lingering authority. Ambiguity is instantly terminated, and the enemy is systematically reset by the structure of the sphere itself.
Finally, Section 6, Intellectual Property and Licensing. Let's talk about the real-world scale of Harshal systems.
This architecture is built for massive, professional implementation and is available for commercial licensing. The structure is offered as a distributed model of just $1 per unit via nSpaceYOL at iCloud.com. Or, if you want to cover the entire English-speaking world, it's available for a flat $1 billion USD. A heavy number for sure, but maybe a bargain for civilizational survival.
It's absolutely crucial to note that this entire unified architecture, the accountability-gated systems, the orb communicator model, and the human-machine hybrid systems are the strictly regulated and proprietary intellectual property of Harshal Priyavadan Patel, copyright 2026. This is an incredible synthesis of geometry, intelligence, and a hardline guarantee that responsibility precedes power.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought about true stewardship in our increasingly automated world. This framework points to a conceptual fourth phase, the orb invariant. At 353 degrees, the absolute highest intelligence of this planetary phenomenon is defined simply as the sphere holds. It's not about deciding to attack, it's about preserving the boundary integrity of the center. So ask yourself, when the connection to human responsibility is severed, is your system truly smart enough to just stop? Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep learning.